All right, everyone. Welcome to June's edition of Meet Our Contributors. My name's Paris. I work at Google doing Kubernetes community management. This is Mentors on Demand, a web series for all things Kubernetes development and community. We welcome you from a live stream on YouTube. If you are joining us today to ask questions, we do have some rules and where to post your questions. First things first, we have our Meet Our Contributors Slack channel on the Kubernetes Slack team. If you do not have access to the Slack, it's slack.k8s.io. We also will be taking questions from Twitter as well if we have some time. If you'd like to hashtag that would be great. That would be hash K8SMOC for Meet Our Contributors. And then also feel free to DM me as well if you'd like to remain anonymous on Slack. My DM is just Paris, my name, Paris. And also, for the panelists that are here today, feel free to ask each other questions as well. Feel free to be conversational. And then we'll get into some introductions in a second. Also, last but not least, we do have a code of conduct for all of our forums. So that includes panelists as well as anyone asking and answering questions in our Slack channels. So please be aware of that and please be nice to each other. And let's go into intros really quick. I will start at the top of my Zoom screen here. Steve, that means you're up first. Why don't you give us a quick rundown of who you are and how you got involved in Kubernetes?
Thanks, Paris. I'm Steve. I work at Red Hat, and I'm one of the SIG testing co-leads. I got started at Kubernetes because of the testing automation that SIG testing was making. It was just head and shoulders above a lot of the other stuff that we saw. So we wanted to adopt it for our projects at Red Hat, and we wanted to contribute back to the SIG as well.
Thanks, Steve. Next, Ilya.
Hi, I'm Ilya. I'm with Weaveworks, and I've worked on kubeadmin in the past and other different projects, not so much on Kubernetes itself lately, as many things are in different repos now, and it's hard to define what defines a Kubernetes project itself. Anyway, so I've been working on a lot of ecosystem projects for different things, and for example, yesterday we just released the KS Kernel. I posted the link in the chat. Which is a project looking for contributors as well. So that's one thing. But then obviously I have experience with Kubernetes itself, so I have to share that here.
All right, and then let's go to Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Van Slyke. I work out of Chicago for the Azure team at Microsoft, and I mostly work on SIG service catalog. I'm pretty new to Kubernetes, but I just love it so much, so I've kind of dived in and just tried to do all the things at once. I'm also starting to work a little bit with the contributor experience group, which is also super fun, trying to build out more info about how to on-ramp more contributors to a SIG, because I love working with lots of fun new people and don't want it to just be like all stuffy vendors or something boring like that. So if you're looking for a place to contribute, Service Catalog is always looking.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. And then Eeyore.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ihor Dvoretsky. I'm a developer advocate at CNCF. And also, I'm one of the co-leads of SIG product management at Kubernetes community. Besides that, I'm deeply involved into the release cycles, into the SIG release activities together with SIG contributor experience.
And then lastly, George, who is streaming our YouTube right now and making all things possible for us to come to you live today. George works at Heptio there he is. George works at Heptio on Kubernetes community topics as well. And both George and I are active in the special interest group for contributor experience, which Carolyn just name dropped as well. So we are always looking for new contributors, and that we aim to make the contributor experience as smooth as possible and as awesome as possible across all of our Kubernetes repos. All right, so let's get into the questions. Well, actually, first things first, thank you, panelists, so much for joining us today. I just wanted to give you a quick thanks before we start. All right. We have several questions today. Teague, the first question is coming from him. This was after our last Meet Our Contributors. So Teague says that I have my first couple of PRs in service catalog, and it's great. It even says contributor next to my name on GitHub. Woot woot. Since I always think far in advance about my career, tell me about being a maintainer. What kind of people are maintainers? You should think about being a maintainer if you like XYZ. How often do maintainers get to contribute? In general, how long have maintainers been a part of the community as a contributor before they became a maintainer? What's the process of becoming one? Do you apply? Are you selected? Etc. So I think the TLDR is tell us a little bit about maintainership within the Kubernetes community. Does anybody want to go first?
I actually would like to know what the answer is. I don't actually know myself.
So I'm a new maintainer for Service Catalog and can kind of talk about how I got sucked into that. I was very new to Service Catalog, but because I had just been hired at Microsoft and it was my full-time job, I was able to do a lot of significant contributions very quickly, mostly the Service Catalog CLI, and then kind of took on a lot of extra things. You don't just become a maintainer because you submitted a bunch of PRs. People are looking for someone who, one, isn't in it just for like their one thing that they needed to like fix in Kubernetes or whatever, and then they're moving on. It's someone who's interested in the project a bit more long-term, someone who is friendly and easy to work with is super important. People who help with the project management side, who are on Slack, say, helping new people, maybe watching issues as they come in, like that huge fire hose, and helping to go, hey, this is actually a dupe of this, or I'd love to help you answer that question, or just interacting with people more with the community and less just being someone who is, it helps to be reliable on pull requests and it helps to care about more than one area. But at least in my mind, what has helped me in the past become a maintainer on other things like DEP, the dependency manager as well, was jumping in and starting to kind of just act as a general point of contact, a lead or whatever, just a friendly guide, essentially. If you make the maintainers' lives easier, they're going to want to make you a maintainer, essentially.
So I'm hearing lots of visibility and not necessarily drive-by contributors, someone that's going to stick with the project and even maybe preferred full-time work. Does anybody else have anything to add to that, Steve or Eeyore?
Sure. There may or may not be like actual processes for becoming a maintainer. I'm not super familiar with that. I know in SIG testing, it's much more how comfortable are you with the code base? How much have you contributed to it? And at some point, once you're super familiar with it, you're able to answer questions like, is this pull request moving us in the right direction? And as soon as you're answering questions like that about intent, and less so, is the code here well written? I think that's when you start to transition into more of a maintainer role. And that comes with triaging issues that are coming in, keeping up to date with all the changes that are happening in that specific part of the code base, and giving reviews, being active in the decision-making process for that code. So I know for us, at least, it's not like a super formal process, but as soon as you start showing, that level of contribution and that level of involvement, it makes sense for everyone else to start listening to your opinion on what you have to say there, and then you slowly become a maintainer that way.
Cool.
I don't have so much to add because the product management area and SIG-PM entirely is a bit different from all other like more technical and more coding SIGs. At the same time, the main thesis Stephen mentioned before, so you have to be active. If you are active, you'll be recognized by this community, and one day you'll be promoted to be a maintainer.
And then Carolyn, you had something else?
Yeah, I had one more thought about this, which is that when Service Catalog, one of the things we're working on right now is actually articulating how it is you get various levels and making it more of an open, transparent process. We're putting out a charter soon and building out like, these are the types of activities we hope to see you do, similar to what the Kubernetes membership guide has already about how you'd actually get the ability to just be a member inside of the Kubernetes org, but also to outline how you could move up like the ladder, so to speak, of how do you become a reviewer, how do you become a approver, how do you become a maintainer or a lead in the SIG. But one of the things that I guess I want to point out is that as a maintainer, there's an increased level of commitment and responsibility that is when it's your full-time job is a lot easier to take on. When it's not your full-time job, I've been a maintainer where I was unemployed or I worked somewhere else and did different things during my day job, and it sounded really cool. And I'm like, I'll be a maintainer and people will think I'm awesome and this will like help my career or something. And in fact, what it did is gave me like a ton of guilt on nights and weekends because I felt like I should be doing project management and doing all these other things. And I felt like I could never stop being a maintainer or put it down. And I was always letting someone down. And it became much easier for me when it was something that was my full-time job. I mean, even as an unemployed person for 6 months, being a maintainer at the same time was like wildly stressful. So I just want to point out that like, if you're totally pumped about open source, but you don't think you'd be able to commit to basically having it be some part of a side job or gig for a certain period of time, you may want to think about your own mental, your own like self-care. And maybe go, a good sweet spot is you're in a position where the SIG loves, or whoever it is you're working with, loves having you around. They enjoy working with you and listen to your opinions, and you're able to like get features in and do fun stuff. But if you decide to like go on a vacation for 2 weeks or have like a life for a month or whatever, you get a new baby, new job, and you don't have to worry about setting anything down, that's actually a really good sweet spot with contributing to open source that I think doesn't get enough cred, because everyone does burn out. Everyone does feel that guilt, I think. It can't just be me. Like, I'm not the only neurotic person out there who just wants to make people happy. And if you like to make people happy, when you pick up that maintainer thing, it's you making a commitment to the people in that group, and be careful about what that commitment means to you. And you can do a lot of the things that are associated with being a maintainer without actually having like the commitment. And that may be a good place to hang for a while until you're so super invested you really just need to be a maintainer because you have strong opinions, or because maybe it's become somehow related to your job and someone's going to help support you in doing this without having it take away from your own personal like sanity.
Carolyn, I think you just gave a KubeCon lightning talk.
Actually, I'm giving a talk on this at GopherCon Denver. There's an open source workshop, a day-long workshop before GopherCon.
Yeah.
And a big part of this is talking about not doing that first PR or picking a project, but how do you sustainably just be involved in open source? How do you move up these ladders regardless if it's Kubernetes or Go or Python community or anything like that, and find a sweet spot so that it doesn't burn you out. And also kind of like a lot of things we talk about with contributor experience related to like, how do you welcome new people in your community? How do you make a community that's easy for people to join and have it be inclusive? There's gonna be a lot of stuff like that. And then the flip side is how do you evaluate a community for these things? Because I don't know, the burnout thing, I've burned out and had to like quit my job like twice probably because of stuff like this. So it's near and dear to my heart that, I don't want to bring people in and then immediately set them up for heartache 6 months down the road.
Yeah, all good points, Carolyn. All right, that was a really good intro question, I thought. Let's get to the next question. The next question is also from Teague, who asks great questions, by the way. The community is great. It makes me curious about other projects going on and what it's like. Oh, I bet Eeyore's going to chime in on this one. For lack of a better word, I find myself to be project promiscuous, but also feel loyal to my first SIG. Can you talk about how people judge how much work they can take on? Sounds like a personal thing, but T feels pretty bad at it. I would like a take on all the issues if no one has any issues with that. Eeyore? I feel like you are the CNCF project holder there.
Yeah, so speaking about the projects within CNCF and within the existing projects in CNCF, some projects like, for example, we had Helm that was a part of Kubernetes community, and it was like the de facto Kubernetes side project. So the best way of picking up the right project for you, where can you contribute, where can you work on, and where can you find some benefits of being a contributor, is exactly that project where you can that project that you can use on an everyday basis. So, for example, my story, how I've been involved into Kubernetes around 3 years ago, and how I made my first commit to Kubernetes was about, like, I've been reading the documentation for Kubernetes, and I found a few places where I can submit my fix. And after that, I've started contributing to Kubernetes on a daily basis. So if you'll find any other project, not only Kubernetes, but any other project in the open source world, it can be Kubernetes, it can be any other CNCF project, it can be even any other open source project entirely, please start contributing there. Please start looking what are the guidelines for contributions are there. Some of the projects can be much more friendly for the new contributors, as we are here at Kubernetes. Some are not. At the same time, all the open source projects should accept any external, any kind of external contributions. And even if your first contribution will be denied, you'll receive the valuable experience of what should you do next, where your next contribution will be accepted there. Also, speaking about contributions, not only coding contributions are the valuable contributions, but also running the meetup groups, running the local communities, running the global communities, speaking at the public events, and so on. That are all sorts of the community contributions. And actually, speaking about the Kubernetes community, we have an amazing contributor experience group who is which is driving all this effort. So if you are interested in what is the best area for you to get started with Kubernetes, and you don't understand how does this process work, let's join one of the C contributor experience meetings. So just check the Slack archives or mailing list archives, and you'll find almost all the necessary information that you may require. It seems that you are muted, Paris.
Yes, I was. Because I was typing away, so I wanted to make sure you weren't catching my typing. Thank you, Eeyore. That was good. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
I guess I would say, like, especially inside of Kubernetes, or I think in general, if you're looking for different projects to contribute to, in my personal experience, I found it's easier to contribute to things I use. So technology that I'm using on a daily basis, if I notice there are things that are, maybe I would improve, or something that's been bugging me, it also lets you make a little bit more informed of a decision as to what you're going to work on, instead of just looking at an issue list and looking for help wanted tags. These are things that you're kind of familiar with because you're touching them day to day, and you can make a contribution that has that level of familiarity. So yeah, maybe as you're using Kubernetes, if you're noticing, oh cool, these apps are really awesome, maybe go look at SIG apps. Or whoa, the API server is like a really awesome piece of equipment there in the middle. Let me go talk to those people. That's how I personally would look at different projects to contribute to.
I think that there's two different ways to kind of look at it. So one, like, I'm a new contributor everywhere I go. I contribute to whatever I have like a stake in, or an itch to scratch, or whatever, a bug that I've hit. It was kind of fun with every single one of those new PRs. Like, it could be within different SIGs, or it could be completely unrelated projects with different languages all across the internet, is you get a feel for, like, are these people you want to do fun stuff with or not? Because part of the reason, like, you're giving up your time, you're giving them, honestly, free work. And some places are more worthwhile to do that than others. So like say you're not really sure you want to do open source, but you're not really sure like who are the fun people I'd like to do things with, is do a couple good, do a couple PRs in different areas. One, you'll start seeing some of the same people. Like it's not just like one SIG, everyone just stays by themselves. Like you're gonna start seeing friendly faces in all these different ones, and some people may be in a great position to help mentor and bring you onto the SIG. And if you just do one and try to stick with a single SIG, you may not find actually that there was another place somewhere else that maybe would have been a super welcoming home. But then after a point, you kind of realize like, these people are fun. I like chatting with them on Slack. They've been super helpful at teaching me maybe Go, more things about Kubernetes. And I feel like they appreciate my efforts. It's welcome. And that's when maybe you start sticking around a little bit more. And it may not be one SIG. It may just be wherever I find Paris, that's where I'm going to be too. Things like that. Because part of the point in getting it open source is either you're scratching an itch or you're trying to be a member in this community. And the Kubernetes community is big, and you can end up going many places and seeing the same people or building up a reputation, maybe not just in a SIG, but across the whole community. So go where it interests you and be with the people who make you feel like this was the right choice and the right way to spend your time, I guess, would be my recommendation.
Oh, I was on mute again. That was really good. Thanks, Carolyn. Is anyone here a contributor of, or not of, to other open source projects outside of Kubernetes? Which ones?
One of the ones that I spent the most time on is a project called Pithos, which uses the Pandora API to give a little desktop client on Linux, so you can listen to Pandora without having a browser window open. It's pretty cool.
I love Pithos. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't know you worked
George
on
from the basement.
that. Is so great. Thank you so much.
I haven't done that much on it, but yeah, somewhere around Fedora 24, I think there was a bunch of bugs and like GTK stuff. But yeah. Cool. Very proud.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you should pass on thanks from George to the Kubernetes community, Steve. Ilya, which ones are you a part of?
Well, obviously, I contribute to some of the vWorks projects, such as Flux and LeadNet and some of the other ones. I've recently created one of my own EKS kernel that I shared earlier. Is the easier way to create clusters in EKS, which is making EKS as easy as the Azure equivalent and Google equivalent. So they basically chose to leave it up to the ecosystem, so we picked it up. And other few personal projects that are kind of under my own name, such as KubeGen and KubePlay, which are all related to Kubernetes. I haven't got anything that is not related to Kubernetes at the moment.
Eeyore, anything else? Do you contribute to anything else outside of like CNCF projects?
I don't really contribute there, but I'm actively tracking. For example, I'm a big fan of the Chromium OS and Chromium project as an everyday consumer of Chrome OS on my desktop. Also, I'm looking for I'm looking for contributions, and I'm looking around in there, not only the CNCF official ecosystem, not only into the CNCF official projects, but some projects that are forming this entire big world of cloud native related applications and cloud native related projects. And after KubeCon, one of my most beloved projects that is formally outside of CNCF and outside of Kubernetes community is Kubeflow. So if you're interested in Kubernetes and machine learning, this is the best project to dive deep.
All right. Okay, that is awesome. Sounds like we've got some good open source citizens on the call, which is awesome. All right, next question is from a DM, and it is a testing related question. So Steve, this might be you first, unless anyone else wants to chime in. They ask, does everything really need an end-to-end test?
As a straw man, I think the answer is no. If in order to test something appropriately, I think if it's a large enough component, you start looking at testing specific parts of that component individually in unit tests, and you might, for instance, if it's a change to kubectl, you're going to end up writing the CMD tests in Bash instead. End-to-end testing is good when you have complex, like cluster level, or deployed on the cluster level behavior you want to validate. End-to-end tests are pretty heavyweight, and so generally, I think one of the things that SIG testing has said a lot of times to their contributors in our meetings, if you can achieve the testing without actually standing up a cluster, without needing a node or a hollow node, don't go to that level of complexity. Like sometimes it might be really simple to just jump there, and there's a lot of frameworks and stuff you can lean on when you're writing an end-to-end test. But at the same time, you're picking up a huge amount of complexity. And I think one of the things that you always need to keep in mind when writing tests is it's always a trade-off. It's not a simple, tests are always good, more testing is always better. As you add tests, especially tests that are relying on network connectivity, you're adding possibilities of flakes. And even if your code is perfect, like for instance, if you had a test that was reaching out into the network, that network isn't. And so we're going to see flakes from that sometimes. And so you're adding tests which increase the likelihood of flakes in the future. You're adding tests that increase the time it takes to run the actual suite. So you always have to consider the test as a trade-off. And so if you're testing a fairly simple, small change, going to an end-to-end test right away may not be the right solution. However, if you're writing a massive component, end-to-end tests are going to be critical to make sure it works correctly. So I guess I would think about it that way.
Anyone else have anything to add about that?
I have just one thought, which is it depends on where it is you made the change. No one likes to run a 5-minute test and then iterate on it and then figure out that like what they did doesn't work. So if you can write a unit or an integration level test or use the fake client or something like that, and you're able to fully exercise the interesting parts of your code and its error behaviors and edge cases, like you will save yourself so much time and it'll be way easier to debug than if you have a test that relies on a whole bunch of setup and various components that are just going to be a lot slower than something that you can do a simple go test to execute. So.
All right, good responses. And the next question comes from DBBC Garcia in the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel. It sounds like they're coming from the sysops world and they're only an enthusiast about Golang, but they want to start contributing to Kubernetes. How difficult is it to get set up in terms of understanding the code base of Kubernetes and do a first PR? Do they need to know Golang to do so? So essentially, how can someone from the sysops world be a valuable contributor to Kubernetes?
Can I answer as a person from the ex-sysops world?
Yes, take it away.
So it's not a strong requirement for you to know Golang to contribute something to Kubernetes, because not only the whole code base of Kubernetes consists of Golang files. We have enough documentation, for example, enough release notes, enough items where can you contribute based on your sysops experience. We have, for example, the Kubernetes examples repo where we're collecting the best examples from the world of how can you run Kubernetes in different scenarios. And if you have learned some basic concepts, and if you have noticed some interesting scenarios where you can run Kubernetes or some applications on top of Kubernetes and you'd like to share with the world, please submit a PR to Kubernetes examples repo. So the basic answer is no, Golang is not a major requirement. But speaking about the Golang expertise, I would pass this ball to some different people who are the real code-based contributors on this code.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
I'd say also if you have experience with code just in general, I think one of the huge upsides of Golang as a language is it is fairly simple. I think it's got a pretty small feature set, and starting off without being a Golang wizard is perfect. And I think I mentioned this before too, like looking for projects that you're interested in contributing to. I think one of the things that's going to make it easier as a new contributor is if you find a specific part of Kubernetes that you're interested in. Maybe looking at demos from the different SIGs and looking at something that really piques your interest. Trying to understand the Kubernetes codebase as a concept, I think, will be impossible for most mere mortals. And so I wouldn't necessarily start by trying to read from the top down. But yeah, find a demo that's really cool. Find something that really interests you, and then seek out that SIG and look for help wanted issues, and start small. And if you're starting small, you're going to be reading just a little bit of code and changing just a little bit of code. And as you do that, you're going to gain more familiarity with Go. And I think absolutely you don't need to have that Go experience coming in. I think the language and the way the code base is laid out is going to make it a lot easier for you to just like ramp up kind of slowly into that.
Super good advice. Caroline, looks like you had something to say.
I always have something to say. I'm just trying to be polite. No, I think that if you're experienced with code in general, I like to dive in on the outer edges of a project so that it's easier to get in and exercise it. So the CLI or edges of the API are often a lot easier to jump in when you're not familiar with the language, because you don't have to figure out how to like get a whole cluster up and running and then tweak random things and install a special build that you have of something. Like if you're just changing one thing on the edge, oftentimes it's easy to just tweak your one thing and be able to try out and do it. And if you are comfortable reading code, oftentimes you can just fake it and no one will even realize you don't know Go. That's how I learned Go. I just pretended I knew it and no one questioned it. But the other thing that I've been doing to both get familiar with code and a new language in general is I play the home game for PRs. I pick a spot where like maybe they have lots of good first PR or help wanted PRs, but like not everyone can do that one issue, but you can always just kind of do it along with them at home. Like I'll either watch their PR if I had no clue how to solve it and watch the comments as they come in and see like, how did someone solve it? What are some of the feedback pieces maybe they got on the language in particular? Someone goes, hey, did you know about channels or something like that? Or maybe I'll try it out myself and then see when someone submits a final PR for it and gets merged, did that look anything like mine? And that just kind of can help you build out a little bit more comfort with an area of code and see how other people are doing it and go, oh, actually, I could have done that myself. I could have submitted that PR. I was pretty darn close. That's another good way to do stuff. But otherwise, I would say that if you are very new to programming, make sure that when you are jumping in, that you aren't leaning too heavily on the people who are helping you to teach you the language. That's something that people love to help. But if you don't know the language, like make sure that you're doing a bit of due diligence on your own part as well to figure out how to set up your machine, just how do you run Go tests, things like that, so that when you do ask for help, it's taking advantage of the Kubernetes specific knowledge that these people are willing to share with you so that you don't burn them out too. So you're welcome. It's just that maybe could kind of help set the difference between like, what are okay questions to ask? And if it's something that maybe you could ask in the Gopher Slack instead of the Kate Slack, you may be able to have a wider support net of people who are helping to answer your questions without feeling like a total jerk pestering the same person all the time.
That was super good advice about going to the Gopher community. Ilya, did you have any thoughts on the sysops turning into Kubernetes contributor?
Yeah, well, I mean, I struggle to see the difference between, the kind of personas we often talk about, ops and developers. Like I think they often have very similar skill set. It just concerns a bit different, right? Maybe for some people. Yeah. So but like what Ihor said was pretty good. If somebody doesn't actually want to write code and want to contribute to the project, documentation is a great place to start.
Good tips, y'all. All right. So earlier we heard a little bit about what you contribute outside of Kubernetes. But why Kubernetes to start with? Why is Kubernetes your primary focus for open source contributions? If you say that that's because it's your full-time job, why did you take that job? There's other open source projects that are supported at other companies. So why Kubernetes?
It's the right way to do things in this day and age.
And he drops the mic.
Run applications in the cloud, to be more specific, right?
Ilya, it's the right way.
Yeah, it's the right way to run applications in the cloud in this day and age, or non-cloud. Or what's that? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, it's the right way to run applications anywhere.
Fair. Carolyn, I think you would say. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. Was that you first?
Go for it, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I get paid to contribute to Kubernetes, I'm super grateful for that. That's sort of a miracle. The technology is awesome. It's really, really exciting. And I think past that too, like, especially in SIG testing, it's very, very open. And I found that contributing, with members from 5 or 6 different companies, different viewpoints, different focuses, different goals, we just make it work. And that's super awesome. I think if having the choice now, I'm not going to go anywhere else. It's a lot of fun. The technology is really cool, and the community makes it work really, really well.
I would second Ilya speaking about the best way of running applications, but I would also add that the best way to run applications are running them in containers. But Kubernetes is the best tool set to run them on any scale, probably except if your local laptop. But even if on your local laptop, you can do it with Kubernetes. At the same time, Kubernetes was born as the orchestration toolset, but today it's not only the technology; it's the really big ecosystem and a big group of small and big projects. And looking at, for example, the scale of the recent conference in Copenhagen, where we had more than 4,000 attendees, you can notice that not all these people were interested in Kubernetes itself, not only in running some applications with Kubernetes, but there have been so many people who've been interested in some other sort of collaboration with other tools and using some other tools for the different projects and so on. So contributing to Kubernetes today is the best way of contributing to one of the most popular, most important, and one of the biggest projects in the open source world, not only today, but the whole history of open source.
And then last but not least, Carolyn.
Okay, so I'm not gonna say Kubernetes is the best. That's not why I contribute to it. I think a lot of things are really cool, but are super intimidating or scary to work on. You'll never see me on a Linux kernel maintainer list trying to do things. But I've always been really interested in helping other developers. So you'll always find me writing those CLIs, or I'm like the person who's setting up a Jenkins build, or eventually I'll turn this into Ansible or Chef or something for you, and then I'm like, I can make one master build script to roll them all to help you do stuff, and then here are all these things that can help you debug in production, and those are the things I love. I hate being on call, and I'm not that great at understanding customers who aren't me, but I like doing things for other devs because it feels the feedback loop is very strong, and it makes you feel good about what you're doing. So, I liked containers, which is fun, and I started using Kubernetes for my own silly things. And when I realized how nice everyone was in the Kubernetes community, and we're just super welcoming and not scary, and weren't calling me names, or I didn't have to be a very elite CS type person who knew algorithms, don't tell Microsoft, but I don't do algorithms. That kind of stuff. It just felt like a good place to give the gift of my time. I guess, because I got something out of it as well that kind of gave me energy to keep doing it from day to day.
I don't do algorithms either, by the way. Full disclosure.
I just want to add something real quick on this one. Coming from an old ops background, I think a lot of us have been kind of waiting for, like, I saw the demo where it was like, I have a multiple webs front end, and then, you know, they pull the Ethernet cable out the back, and then the thing still keeps working, right? And I can think of how many people I've known through my professional career that have to make systems like that, right? And now with things like Kubernetes, is people will just have that stuff out of the box, and it's kind of like all of the interesting work is going into distributed systems now, and that's like where the real problems are. I think now, you know, we figured out single node. I have a Linux server, right? Like, that's great, but, you know, at some point as you move up the stack, it's like the problems we're trying to solve are now so much more complicated than the simple projects that, like, I started out with, right? And I just think it's, for a lot of people, I think there's a challenge there, and it really helps that Kubernetes is kind of a newer project as well. So it was smart enough to say, oh, you know, the only way this can work is if we have a vibrant community with, like, a good code of conduct and structures in place, so that, you know, people like me who aren't algorithm or programmers even at all, but have maybe a little bit of ops background, can find places to contribute without, you know, it kind of turning into, you know, like this kind of elite only kind of thing, right? There's always a place for you to go, because the problem is so complex that I think it draws people who like that kind of challenge. You're trying to solve things that, like, normal people don't get to mess with, like, at all, right? You know, 5 years ago, you had to work at Google or at Facebook or something to see these kind of things. Now anyone can kind of get started into this thing. That's why I dig it. So I don't know.
Cool. Thanks, George. I'm like waiting for your click to go back to to the George Castro. There, boom. All right. So next question actually has to do with code reviews. DM from a current member who is active in many SIGs and making different levels of contributions. Their Kubernetes path, if you will, they'd like for it to be a reviewer in an owner's file. I guess for some folks also watching, if panelists could just maybe describe what an owner's file is too. But anyway, what are some tips for Kubernetes code reviews and how they can do them well? Steve or Carolyn, I have a feeling you both have some good insights here.
I can jump in. Is the question related to how do you go from contributor to reviewer, or is it how to have a smooth PR though?
I think it's more like what when they're reviewing. I think the wording was a little off, but it's like more like how when they're reviewing PRs, what are some tips for actually reviewing the code for the review itself if they're the reviewer?
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like they want to be a reviewer, and it sounds like they're trying to get some experience for code reviewing under their belt, and they want to make sure that they're doing it right.
Yeah. I like to try to ignore as much as possible how I would have solved the problem, because I feel it's really easy to derail a PR by basically using your comments to turn the code into what you would have wanted to have written. So that's pretty important to go, I may have a feel or a thought about what I see here, but does it impact the final solution? Will this cause us problems? And if no, zip it and just be like, let it go, Elsa, or whatever her name is, Frozen. And so that's like one big thing. Another is that I like to use it as an opportunity to ask questions and explore different avenues of things. Like one, I use my reviews as a way to learn. So sometimes you'll see something and you'll be like, I have no clue what they just did. And you could have a couple different reactions to that. You could look at it and be like, what the heck are they doing? This doesn't make any sense. And you can get kind of like grumpy at the person, or you could look at it as an opportunity to go, maybe they know something about the language that I don't, and you could ask about that and go, hey, what are you doing here? I'm just curious. I'm just curious in front of a ton of things so that people understand it's not a criticism. It's a me seeking a little bit of sharing and knowledge from them, which also makes the relationship with people a lot smoother if you don't come off as like accusatory. So that's one thing, but just otherwise, try to just check some of the boxes of like, if this goes in the way it is right now, is it making things better? Can we build on it? Or have we just made a bad commit and master? And as long as we're avoiding that, I like to, and this is maybe just a service catalog SIG thing. I don't know if this is a big, Kubernetes repo thing, but we really like the concept of iterative PRs. So we may come up with like another thing we want to be able to do. We look at it and we get some cool idea. And instead of asking them to continually shove more things into their PR or change things around, we may go, this is perfectly fine if we ship this as is. We've got the tests. It's not going to cause trouble. And then we'll give them info like, hey, as a follow-on, if you could give us another PR that did this, that would be super helpful. And it's kind of nice too, because it helps that person come back and do more contributions in a similar area. And it builds up their confidence, and they're more likely to come back and be regular contributors. So that's kind of important to me. And the other thing is when you have feedback, but it's not going to cause you to reject the PR, I like to call that out and be like, this is, in Service Catalog, we use the term knit, which I was not familiar with, but oftentimes people just say knit this, or I usually say like, this is fine if you don't change it, but you may want to consider foo, because that allows you to continue to have a conversation and not edit what you're saying, but still provide useful feedback to them that doesn't have to be so draconian that you're like, do exactly what I say, or you can't play with us.
Steve, did you have anything to add to that or jump in from a testing perspective?
So I think the first to the question of what is an owner's file and how do they work. So the automation that we are running for the Kubernetes org breaks up ownership of code into directories, and the specific owners of a directory are listed in a little file in that directory. And so when you create a PR, depending on which files you're touching, people that own those specific files are actually pulled out and automatically assigned to review your PR. So as far as owners files, like that's what that's meaning, and really that's just a proxy for being a maintainer or a good reviewer for that area. As far as like actual reviews, yeah, I think Carolyn had some really good points. Like you have to keep in mind at all times that writing code is like an artistic process. There's never one right way of doing something. And keeping your own personal opinions of how you would solve it kind of back is super, super positive as a piece of feedback. I actually had a list since this question came up at some other point. There's questions you can ask as a reviewer, and I guess some of these like really depend on how comfortable you are with the specific piece of code. But is this a change that we want? Does it move in the right direction? And if it's not, maybe there should have been a design doc that came out first where people hash out, is this something we actually are looking for? And if it is, how do we want to get there? Is it respecting boundaries of abstraction that have been built before? I think that's, especially as like a reviewer maintainer, if you have abstracted boundaries in your code and you try to keep things organized, like keeping in mind, does the code here follow that? And especially, and not so much in Kubernetes testing but I think like in some of the other like testing systems that I've worked on personally, like sometimes they're Bash scripts or they're Python scripts, and things are kind of willy-nilly. But when you start breaking those abstractions down the line, you're picking at tech debt. If it's an entirely new feature being added, is it being added as a subcomponent of something? Are we testing it? How does it fit in? And is it fitting into the right place? If the changes going in, what's the impact on tech debt? Are we increasing tech debt? If we are, is it reasonable? Like, that's another thing that isn't always a black and white. You should never increase tech debt. Like, it's, and I think, you know, the comment about iterative PRs is an example of this. Like, oftentimes it makes a lot of sense to get something in that works, is pretty cool, but maybe has some tech debt, or maybe has some room for improvement later. But just being cognizant that you're picking up tech debt and you're doing it on purpose because you can fix it later. Like, keeping that in mind is good when you're doing a review, so that you can say, whoa, like, this is a little bit too much, or like, this is cool, we can fix it later. And are you leaving the code that you're touching in a good place for somebody else to come in after you? Are there a bunch of to-dos? Is it kind of cryptic? Like, are you holding are you the person that's writing the code? Like, are they holding the keys to the kingdom, or are they leaving it in a place that's like, oh, you know, if they look at the previous commit, it's clear where this is going. So if that person, you know, maybe decides they don't want to contribute anymore, or if a couple other people all want to contribute at the same time afterwards, is the code in a good place for other people to read it? And then sort of like detail oriented, if we're fixing a bug, I think it's oftentimes a really, really good place to add testing to make sure that that bug never comes up again. Sometimes bug fixes without tests involved, you have to think about, okay, so why are we not going to have the same problem in a month? How are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? And then similarly, if we're adding features, like, is it tested at the right level? Are we testing, you know, specific functionality? Is it complicated enough to warrant an EDE test? And then even like specific review for like functions or modules, like, what are the assumptions going into this? And are those assumptions documented? Are they going to hold? Again, you know, you don't need to go in assuming nothing, right? It's fine to go in having assumptions, but just making sure that you keep those in mind, so that in the future, if you're changing it, if someone else is changing it, like, that code is still going to be working. And then I think, especially as you are reviewing code, maybe that's more like in the control plane side of things, like, what's the intended failure mode? Is it re-entrant? Is it fail-safe? Is it going to clean up after itself? Like, it's an eventually consistent system that drives Kubernetes. Like, does it fit into that failure mode? And is it clear how this code is supposed to fail? Because taking care of failures is just as important as taking care of the happy path where everything works. That's what I said.
All right. Looks like, hold on, I think we have another question. I know we only have a few minutes left. Let me read the question, or else I might bump it to the next session. Okay, yep, no, we're good. And all right, I think we should wrap it here before we get into any more questions. First things first, thank you so much to the panelists. Y'all were very awesome. Love all of your different perspectives. You're in so many different SIGs and different projects and different parts of the community. So it's lovely having all of your voices here. Thanks to George for live streaming us and making us as awesome as possible. Hopefully we all look beautiful on the internet. George, you better be doing your job. And our next session is going to be in about 4.5 hours. If you're watching us live, if you're recorded, then you'll just hit play. Or if you're watching the recording, you'll just hit play. So I will see everyone on the Kubernetes interwebs. Thank you so much. See you later. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.